Liz, how are you?
I'm good, Brendan. How are you?
Very well, thanks. It's great to meet you, and thank you for doing this. I appreciate it a lot.
No problem at all, and thank you for reaching out. Excited to be participating.
Superb. So you're the Director of Medical and Clinical Affairs, if I'm right, at Acuvue. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
You are pronouncing that correctly, yes, absolutely. I started that position actually just recently in December 2021. And as part of that role, I suppose I'm in charge of a couple of different things, or responsible for a few different things, including kind of the publication and strategy for the company, clinical research, so looking at designing clinical research studies and collecting data on the device.
And what is it they do, Liz? What do Acuvue actually do?
So Acuvue manufacture a device. It's a near-infrared device that is, I suppose, mostly at the moment we're in the peripheral IV access space. So it helps in terms of identifying veins, so that you can insert your peripheral IV catheters. So that's kind of where we are, but there's obviously several other clinical applications as well for it, even in like the plastic surgery space as well. But very much immersed in peripheral venous access and vein visualization. So the fun part of that is I get to work with a lot of nurses, because as you can imagine, we're often the ones who are tasked with having to insert those IV catheters. So. Yeah.
Brilliant. And you're just, as you said, you started that very recently, didn't you? Just before Christmas or something like that?
Just before Christmas, yeah, I took on that role. And yeah, absolutely. I'm loving it. Like, it's great. I suppose the medical device industry is kind of a step away. I suppose if you think when you start out on a nursing career, you don't envisage yourself, I suppose, moving into, let's say, something like that, working with medical devices. But it's something that I've really, really enjoyed, and it's kind of what I've transitioned into over the last number of years.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and maybe we'll come back to this role, because it sounds fascinating actually. And although you're quite new in it, but I mean, let's take it all the way back. I mean, you got your nursing degree in University College Cork. But even before that, what attracted you to nursing at the very beginning?
Yeah, I think I always had nursing, I think, in my mind. And there's an image that comes to mind straight away. It's a picture of me when I was like 4 with a nurse's hat on me. My aunt was a nurse, and I had a grand aunt on the other side of my family. So on both sides of the family, really, I had a nursing influence, let's say. Yeah. And yeah, I suppose for me as well, personally, so I had, when I was younger, I went through a couple of surgeries, hip surgeries and things as I was growing up. So had to, had been in and out of hospital a few times, during my childhood. Yeah. And, I suppose that experience, definitely, I understood what nurses did. I suppose when you're a patient yourself, you really appreciate, I suppose, what a nurse does, and you value it. So it was something that, yeah, I just, brought with me all the way through, let's say, secondary school. And then when I was doing my leaving cert, I remember I had a few things I was looking at, and one of them was still nursing, but I was also considering things like radiography was another one. And then there was another course, I remember, in UCC on genetics that I was looking at too, just because I loved the biology and the genetics and all of that side of things. Yeah. But in the end, I was pretty definite, and I know I did some like work experience and all of that when I was in secondary school, let's say, and was very definite that nursing was what I wanted. So I put that down first, and yeah, I mean, I've never looked back. I think I've absolutely loved it, and just been very lucky in my career, and in just where I've, opportunities that have presented themselves. Yeah. And I've kind of taken them and just rolled with it, I suppose, in a way. And then it's brought me different directions, and I've been able to travel the world, and definitely, like, from when you think of it, okay, typical nursing career, I suppose mine wouldn't be typical at all. It would be, I've zigzagged really in terms of what I've done. But I loved every minute of it, and still do, and still contributing, I suppose, as much as I can to the nursing profession. So,
Yeah.
so even though I'm working, I mentioned the medical device industry, let's say, I'm still working with University College Cork academically,
Yeah.
and lecturing nurses there. And then also I'm a member of an international nursing organisation called Sigma. So I don't know if you know about them, but they're an honour society of nursing. They have got chapters all over the world, and hundreds of thousands of members, all nurses. And I was absolutely honoured to be elected to the board of directors in November. So I'll be serving in that for the next 2 years.
Wow, congratulations!
So it's just great. Yeah, thank you. So it's been fabulous, and I just absolutely love every minute of what I do, and that I can still contribute kind of to that nursing profession development and stuff. So yeah,
that's brilliant to hear, and it's great. When people say they love what they do, that's not such a common thing to hear, and that's brilliant that you have that. And you mentioned zigzagging in your career, because a lot of people that wouldn't be close to nursing and what doors that can open might assume, you go to university, you get your nursing degree, and then you're a nurse in hospital, and that's kind of what the career is, which of course is not always the case. But maybe can we go back to just the nursing degree? So for anyone maybe listening that's thinking of doing a nursing degree, what was that 4-year experience like? What does that degree entail when you go and do that? Can you talk a little bit about that side of it?
Absolutely, yeah. So I did my undergraduate in UCC in Cork. It's I did a general nursing degree. There are different options. You can do, different specialties in mental health or intellectual disability, or even midwifery as well. And I opted for the general nursing route. It was 4 years, and I actually remember I started in September, and by December I was on the wards. Like, I was in a clinical environment by the first week, I think it was, of December. We had a couple of weeks before Christmas of just clinical exposure, and that for me was excellent. I found that brilliant, that you're so early on, you're starting to engage with clinical practice, and that runs the whole way through. So every single year you're going to be undertaking clinical placements, leading up to your final year. So in your final year, the January of that year, so you do your first semester, but in the second semester then you are an intern, nursing intern. So you're working for 9 months on in whichever hospital you've been assigned to, and you are partnered with one of your student nurse colleagues, and you work very closely with them, but you actually begin to take on kind of a patient load, obviously under supervision. And that clinical immersion part of it, I think for me was excellent. Also then in terms of an early clinical immersion, was just brilliant. And then you also, I suppose, in terms of content, it's a Bachelor of Science undergraduate degree, so you cover all the basic science subjects, anatomy, physiology, microbiology, all the rest of it. And then you do, it's such a, when you think about it, really, it's such a kind of a diverse learning, because you do a bit of psychology as well. You need to understand some of that when you're dealing with patients. Communication is a huge part of it. So all the way through the program, you'll be developing and honing those, communication skills. And then research and evidence-based practice as well is kind of another big component, that you're understanding how to find evidence first of all, and kind of and then critique it and apply it to your nursing practice. So that's kind of, you spend your 4 years, building yourself up in terms of that. The other side of it, I would say, is the collegiality and the friendships that you develop, in nursing. And I've heard this from several of my colleagues. I think there's nothing like it. I'm friends for life with the people that I met that I studied with as an undergrad. One of them being Serena, I would say. So Serena and I were in the same year.
Yeah, Serena being my sister, for anyone that is listening. Yeah.
Yeah, so Serena and I were, in the same year all the way through, and then we did our PhDs together, and were a great support to one another during that time as well. I was very grateful to have Serena. But yeah, just I suppose going back to kind of the undergrad degree, it's I think you experience things and you see things in clinical practice that you can only, I suppose, that only your fellow nursing students will understand,
right.
like how you're feeling or how you're, and obviously then you have to be confidential, so it's not like you can come home and talk a lot about things or share maybe something that obviously you can do it in a kind of an anonymous or a confidential way, but it's there, you have that burden, I guess, where you're seeing things very early on in your undergraduate degree. And when I say seeing things, you're just observing life, like it's life situations and just difficult situations that people might be going through. And there's just something unique about that, and I think that definitely helps in terms of building those friendships that you have with your nursing colleagues, because everybody it's like an unspoken thing, everyone understands like what you're going through, kind of. So and there's a lot of personal development in that too, so it's really nursing, I think, is just, for anyone thinking about doing it, I would say absolutely 100% do, and definitely just talk through, obviously get an understanding for what the clinical will be like, and there's long hours and there is all of that side of it that it can be difficult, but the reward at the end of the day is just there's no comparison. I think.
So it sounds like it kind of met your expectations. So before going in, you had a long road thinking about going into nursing, as you said at the beginning, and obviously some long-lasting impressions in your life on the career as well. But was there any surprises in that 4 years, or in terms of what was the biggest challenges, or was it that very fact you said there? It's the life aspect of it, and did that surprise you? Was it a big challenge?
For me, no, I would say no, it wasn't a major challenge, and I think that would be because of my own personal experiences, let's say, with the healthcare environment, and even just procedures and things like that. But then as well, I had gone and actually secured some clinical placement or exposure before I started nursing. So I was working in a nursing home and starting to kind of immerse myself again into that clinical role before I even started in the September, first year of my undergrad degree. So I think that definitely helped, and that's why I would, absolutely say, if you're in your transition year or at any point that you can get an opportunity to do that, and it can be anything. It mightn't be the nursing home or even your local GP, just to kind of see, could you shadow someone there, or shadow one of the nurses there, or whatever. I think that type of experience is very helpful, and helpful in the decision making around pursuing nursing as well, obviously.
Yeah. And so when you got to the end of the 4 years, then, Liz, of the general nursing degree, what doors opened to you at that point? What are your options?
Yeah, so at the end of the 4 years, like I said, you have your internship, so you're in clinical practice. I'm probably not, or my year or my class at that time are probably not the best example, because it was, it was a difficult time in Ireland when we qualified. It was 2010.
Okay.
And so things were just, there was kind of a block on.
You have a friend there in the background.
I do. I can see her hand in the door. There was what would I say? There was a restriction on hiring nurses across the health service. Yeah. So that was difficult. So I suppose in terms of clinical opportunities, we may not have had as many, let's say, as maybe nowadays, because I think it's becoming more and more visible, and there's more public, what would you say, or more media even reporting around the nursing shortage. Yeah. So you'd hope that nowadays things would be better. But so I suppose from a clinical perspective, I was working first of all in the South Infirmary, University Hospital in Cork, and that's where I had trained and qualified. I absolutely loved working there. And then moved into doing some agency nursing. So I was working for an agency in Cork and working across the health service, including in Cork University Hospital, which was absolutely brilliant experience as well, because it's obviously the largest hospital. Sorry, the background.
It's a great experience. She agrees.
She does, absolutely. It's the largest hospital in Cork, as you know, so or even in it's so that was great, getting some exposure there. So that was the clinical side of it. But then I was very fortunate, I think, to have had some great mentors in my final year. And one of them had kind of said to me, look, in terms of my research proposal and what I was doing in my final year, that it was very good, and would I consider publishing it, really was what she had said to me. So we worked together on a publication, and from that then kind of stemmed an opportunity to work in research within the School of Nursing. And it kind of, that led me down then my academic career and into research, which was great.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that then. What is an academic career? Can you describe kind of the steps you've taken and what that requires, and what kind of qualities you need as an individual to be successful at that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So, and I'll just allude first to the fact that, and I said this earlier, things have kind of opened up for me, and it was, again, I was given the opportunity to publish a paper, which I took and did. And then following on from that, these opportunities to work in research just presented themselves, and I absolutely was like, okay, I didn't even, to be honest with you at the time, I didn't even know there was such an opportunity, that such an opportunity would be available to a nurse. So I was absolutely delighted with myself that I could work in research as well, and so I was doing that part-time and then doing clinical work part-time. But yeah, in terms of what's required, so it's when you're in an academic career, there's a couple of different strands to what you do, let's say, on a typical day. So you're obviously teaching being one of the big things. So I undertook, let's say, some teaching qualification then as well in UCC. So I did a postgrad certificate in teaching and learning, and then undertaking my PhD. And it's kind of expected of you, even as you're undertaking your PhD, that you are, teaching and supporting the teaching within the school as well. So you're assisting kind of on teaching. And then that's one whole strand of kind of your academic component. But then the second thing is research, and that you eventually, through the PhD process anyway, certainly, you become an independent researcher. So you're kind of at the point where you can seek out opportunities to conduct research, and you can actually put even together a team or a consortium of people. You're starting to develop grant proposals, you're publishing. All of that comes with kind of, your research component of an academic career. And then I think the third side of it is kind of your administration. So where you're in academia, you're also expected to take on a kind of an administrative role where you might be overseeing a year, let's say like a first year of an undergraduate degree, or you might oversee a postgraduate program. You might help in terms of developing new programs. There's a lot, so it's kind of, I would say it's threefold, and there's a lot in each one of those. So it requires, I guess, again, you kind of need to be committed and passionate, and from my perspective, it's a privilege, really, the opportunity to educate new nurses and to build that foundation of knowledge for nursing, for the profession as a whole. Through research and through teaching is just that's again another kind of privilege. It's a whole other arena, I suppose, of nursing. So yeah,
very interesting. And what? So you're still doing that? If I'm not wrong,
Yes.
You continue to do that.
Yeah. I've never left my academic roots. I think I've always continued to stay in touch with that. So yeah, I kind of, that, as I said, that brought me down that whole academic route when I took on that research assistant position, and from there started my PhD. Actually, I lie. My first year was a master's by research. So my initial plan, Brendan, was 1 year master's by research, and I'm off to Australia. But that was not meant to be.
Yeah.
Again, it was an opportunity that presented itself. A year down the line, I was asked if I wanted to convert that to a PhD, and I was asked if I wanted to continue working within a research capacity in the school. and it was another opportunity I couldn't refuse. I just felt it was going to open even more doors for me. It was going to bring me down another whole path, and so very, grateful, I guess, for that as well. And then from there I stayed in academia, so I worked, I kind of, continued through my PhD, was working in different positions, both in the School of Nursing and in the Centre for Gerontology, all within UCC. So I was doing kind of postdoc research position, and then trying to, obviously I was up, working clinically as well, throughout all of that, which was challenging because, you can imagine trying to undertake the PhD, work clinically and work in research. It was a lot. But
I assume you're talking long nights and weekends and things like that?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And there was a lot of sacrifice, like in terms of even social life and things like that you had to just, you had to make a choice. And I'm glad I did, I suppose, because it was a short-term pain, I think, for like a long-term gain, really. And then from that, I had a fabulous opportunity to move to the Middle East, and take a position lecturing nurses there with the Royal College of Surgeons. So they have a campus in Bahrain, and I spent almost 2 years there, as well, lecturing and teaching nurses and doing independent research with some of the clinicians out there as well. And it was, again, that was a whole other experience, and that I'm just so grateful for. So,
well, did you notice, and maybe there isn't a difference between that experience and let's say UCC? Do they do things differently when you were in Dubai? Does it follow a similar format in terms of how the work is done?
Yeah, so like from an academic perspective, do you mean, or from academic? Yeah, well, it's an Irish university, so the model is the same as what's done here in Ireland or in Dublin, where RCSI is based. So like from that perspective, and even in terms of the accreditation, it was accredited by NUI, like the national in Ireland. So it was very, very similar in terms of the content and all of that. But the student cohort were obviously different, and it was again another whole cultural experience for me. But I can honestly say I loved it. Like I just absolutely loved getting to know kind of what was the norm, I guess, for within a Middle Eastern community, and even my colleagues as well. A lot of my colleagues were Bahraini, and I just honestly felt very welcomed. Like it's kind of I just can't speak I couldn't speak highly enough of my colleagues there, and how much I felt part of that community and team, and almost like a family, when I was there. I have really great memories from RCSI Bahrain, and then had some Irish colleagues that were there as well. So at the time, the head of school was Seamus Cowman. He's a very well known in the nursing world, professor of nursing. And he was a great mentor to have there, in terms of just understanding kind of the way things work there, the culture. Now, in terms of academically, it was the same, really. You're teaching, you have your clinical skills practice, and then I was lucky enough to set up some research out there as well. Nice. So it was great.
So continued building your profile, and that was for you 2 years, you said, there.
Almost 2 years, yeah. I left there. I suppose that's where the personal life kicked in a little bit. So I met. That's where I met my husband to be, and he is, I should say, he was with the U.S. Navy. So he was based out of there in Bahrain. Right. They have a base actually there. So I met Jamie there, and from there that brought me to a whole other, part of it. We moved from there to Belgium, and then we moved to the US. So since then I haven't stopped traveling. And again, it's funny because it's like a kind of a junction in my life, I suppose, because when it's like when I took the decision not to go to Australia, let's say, and to take on the PhD and continue working. A big decision there, but I don't regret one bit, and it was just a change in where I was going. So I was meant to be going this way, I decided to change direction. And the same, my plan in Bahrain was to come back to Ireland after a couple of years. and it wasn't to be. And I think I'm just, again, very grateful for all those things that have happened.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So when you left Bahrain to go to Belgium, then, so what were you doing yourself, kind of career-wise, at that point in Belgium?
Yeah, so that's where in Belgium it was a little bit more difficult to, to undertake a clinical nursing career, let's say, because language being a huge barrier. Like I don't speak French well. I speak a little bit of it, but not well. And I don't speak Dutch. And really, if you wanted to work clinically in Belgium, or even if you wanted to perhaps teach, you would have to kind of know those languages. So that, to me, then again, I had an opportunity, and it was through UCC. So I was approached again by UCC to say, would I be interested in doing something remote? And I was absolutely jumped at that.
Wow,
I was delighted.
and
so I began teaching remotely when I moved to Belgium, and have not stopped since. So I've been doing that for the past 4 years. And again, very grateful, I think, to my colleagues in UCC that I've just never lost ties with them, and it's been wonderful. So yeah, and that's where I did that. Obviously, that wasn't a full-time opportunity. That was something that I could do on a very much an part-time hourly basis. So I sought out different opportunities, and that's what led me to the industry, really. And I took on a position as clinical research manager for a company that manufacture a device that delivers proton therapy. So it was in the oncology world.
Right.
Proton therapy being a more advanced version of your radiotherapy, which is using kind of X-rays.
Yeah.
This uses protons instead of photons, and the benefit of it being that it's more targeted, so it can reduce side effects. Let's say you shouldn't experience as much side effects as you would, let's say, with your traditional radiotherapy.
Right.
It can, So that, again, a whole other experience. So much learning in that, again, for me. Having to immerse myself. And what was very interesting there was getting to work with other specialties. Like I was working with medical physicists and engineers and risk analysis analysts and all this, just such a multidisciplinary team. And even obviously with a financial and sales kind of department, I was working with those personnel. It just being a nurse, I guess, it was a whole other world again. To see kind of the medical device industry and again, I learned an awful lot there.
And
too.
how did you find? Because that must have been quite a change to the system, because you'd obviously gone from academia, I suppose, into industry. Did you? What was the biggest sort of challenge you faced there, or did you find it quite okay moving from one into the other?
What was the biggest challenge? I guess, I started to recognise, I don't know if this is a challenge, but more so maybe feeling a little bit isolated from the nursing profession probably would be one. So feeling like a little bit kind of a step away. And luckily since then I've moved into other positions, and even where I work right now with Acuvue, there are several nurses on the team.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of, it was just, I suppose, a fact about the company I was with, let's say, in Belgium. And then that would have been a challenge. But I think from a learning perspective, I'm after losing my train of thought, Brendan, what I was going to say.
No, but it's not an applicable question in the sense of, some people are very adaptable, can just go from different aspects of a career into another. I've had a few people on the podcast, for example, that have in financial services, for example, that go from, say, consultancy work into industry, which are two very different things, and they find they don't like it at all. They find it's a very, very different world, and they want to move back in. So I'm just trying to touch on, and maybe it's a question I've noted for a little later, actually, because you've talked about the clinical side, the academic side, now the industry side. And is there one you would choose now that you've gone through all of them that you enjoy the most out of all of them? Or
So what I will say is, you're just kind of getting my train talk on again. Yeah. So the one thing about industry is I miss the clinical contact, I suppose, and kind of that was one thing. You can see the value in what nurses bring to the industry because we have all of that clinical insight, and we will know. Like sometimes you'll have the engineers coming up with the most amazing ideas, like phenomenal, but in terms of clinical application of that, or like the use of that in a hospital or whatever it might be, that's where I think there's huge value in nursing, like because we will see it as well from like a patient perspective, let's say, because we're often the closest to the patients, we spend the most time with them, so I just think that value add in terms of nursing within the industry is one thing that I was thinking about. Which one I would pick, I cannot tell you. I've loved every one of them.
Yeah.
If I could have a blend where I could do a bit of it all, I would be like, it would be the perfect thing for me.
Yeah.
What I do like about the industry is the fast pace and the innovation. So like, it moves very quickly. What I had to do, I did have to shift, and this is probably something that I did find challenging, was shift my thought process. So like when you're working as a nurse clinically, whatever, it's all about, obviously the patient advocacy, and you're very giving of yourself and your time. And it's I know they say it's not a vocation, it's a profession, and it is a profession, but there is a vocation aspect to it. You do give a lot of yourself, and it's I suppose there's that whole kind of interaction clinically. And when you move into the industry, you're in a profit orientated environment. It's sales. It's at the end of the day, yes, it's absolutely, you're improving patient care, and that's what I love about it. You're improving outcomes for patients, you're improving healthcare, you're innovating.
Yeah.
But there is always the sales component, and you do have to, at the end of the day, the point is to make money.
Yeah.
As well. And I suppose that shift, for me into that commercial industry was probably the most challenging, where I had to just kind of think a little differently.
Yeah.
And it's not that I lost touch. For me, I wouldn't be in the industry only that I can find meaning in it, and I understand the impact that it can have on patients and on healthcare.
Yeah.
But when I'm presenting, let's say, ideas, or I'm presenting, proposing something within the industry, how I present that has to be different, so you have to.
Sure.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of a different psychology in a way. And you mentioned on the clinical side, you have to give a lot to yourself. I kind of picked up on that there, and which is something I would have naturally thought. Doctors and nurses, they need to do that, and it kind of comes back to, I suppose, the personality that you kind of need to be successful in a career like this. Do you see, I assume you've seen a lot of people that have gone into the nursing profession, and they just, maybe they didn't have that personality to be able to take some of those very difficult things. Is that true? Would that be a fair statement to make, that does happen, that you need, and what is that personality trait that you need then? Like, or if it's an easier question, what can you not be if you want to be a good nurse?
Wow, that's an excellent question. I'm going to take a stab at giving my tuppence on it, or trying to answer it, but I've certainly seen people struggle, definitely. I've seen, I even have memories of just even being a student and my fellow students just breaking down, and not, there's been really tough days where it's like, I don't know if I can do this long term, and a lot of that would have stemmed from what going back to what I said earlier, what you would see or observe or experience kind of within clinical practice. You're with people in their most vulnerable moments.
Yeah.
And there's parts, I suppose the one good thing though about nursing, like you go into nursing and you know, yeah, there will be absolutely, you can be guaranteed there'll be difficult days and difficult times, and you'll experience and see things that maybe, you know, will just change you. They'll change who you are and kind of how you maybe think of life. Yeah. But then the good side of it is there's so many different paths. Like, so for example, children's nursing, it's something I just couldn't do. I don't think I'd be able. I don't know, it's just something from the beginning I just knew I wouldn't have the resilience or the strength, the courage to look after, you know, sick children. I just think so. I have great admiration. I've, you know, friends of mine as well who have nursed and specialised in the area of children's nursing, and I'm just speaking personally, I suppose, from kind of my thought process. But like, there are parts of nursing that say that you might decide you're just not able to, or it's just not for you. And I think that's one of the good things, is that if you find that in one area, there's plenty of other specialties. There's, you know, even you have clinical research now is kind of a whole other avenue. A whole other pathway for nurses if they wanted to stay engaged clinically, but not kind of, you know, you're not working, let's say, with one clinical unit. You would be working across units. You would be working from research, collecting data. So you're still doing clinical visits with patients. You're still advocating for patients, but it's another whole pathway. And that's just one example. You know, there's loads out there. So I think, and in terms of your question about what people like, what personality you need, I think you go into nursing to, well, at least I did, to help others. Like, so you kind of have you have a drive or a motivation to help other people and improve the lives of other people anyway, to begin with. And then I think you definitely need resilience, and I think you can build that over time. You know, it's not something that you're going to have immediately. I'm still building my resilience, I think. You know, it's a lifelong process, and I think so. That's one thing. I think just strength, and for me, I suppose having what would I say? At the end of the day, so like, you do your 12-hour shifts, and you know, because that's what it's like. That's at the moment the reality of clinical practice. You're working long hours and busy days, but at the end of the day, if you can go home and say, I feel fulfilled in what I did today, like it you know, I feel like I helped someone, it's that side of it is very, very rewarding. I think that's what gives people the strength, almost, you know, when you're in nursing, that's what gives you the strength. I just want to comment, actually, Brendan, just on, I think the past 2 years have been incredibly difficult for nurses, and we're definitely approaching a time where the crisis, whatever it might have been in 2019 in terms of nursing shortage, is probably going to get a whole lot worse in the next couple of years. And I think we are in great need of people to come into nursing and, you know, choose it as a career. And I think if anyone you know, if anyone's considering it, to reach out and speak to people and find out about it. And I would just encourage everyone to if you think it's for you, to undertake, you know, to go ahead and take that career pathway. So
it's an interesting time, isn't it, Liz? Like, the last 2 years, and the effect that'll have on your industry, because it's almost a double-edged sword, because there's the heroic element of, like, the nursing community and all they've done and sacrificed during the pandemic globally, and kind of all the fantastic work they've done. But then there's the flip side of that, is, do you want to be on the front line when it happens again? And it's that double-edged sword, so it will come down to individual sort of choices, as always does. But it's an interesting future, I would say, for it.
It is, and I mean, I would hope that, I don't know, that there'll be kind of an action, let's say, at government level, and that things will improve. I just think it's so needed. Like, it's scary, really. And I mean, I haven't, as you've heard, I haven't been on the front lines these last couple of years. Part of that being, you heard, maternity leave and a few other things tied in there. And so I haven't been on the front line, but I've heard it like firsthand from my colleagues and my friends, like even in this latest surge, particularly in the US. I have some Irish friends actually working in the US who've just, it's horrific what they've had to go through, I think, and see, and they're burnt out, like, you know, they're just, I don't know how much more they can sustain, I think. So there needs to be a global and national just like drive to improve things and try and improve the staffing. But I think, you know, tied with that is improving the working conditions and the hours and all the rest of it, and the resources. They're all tied together. You know,
absolutely,
so,
and hopefully governments globally can step up to the mark in the next couple of years to get that done. I mean, in my head we're still in Belgium, right? So,
go on. Sorry.
But there's one thing on your profile that I was reading through it that stood out for me, because I'd heard of it, but I didn't really know too much about it, and that was the Viktor Frankl Institute and logotherapy and existential kind of analysis and stuff like that, which I find the little I know of it, I find very fascinating, very interesting. I wonder, could you talk a little bit of what brought you to that and what you got out of it yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that all stemmed from my PhD actually. So when I was doing my PhD, my PhD focused on spirituality, and I came across the work of Viktor Frankl as part of my reading and studying in my PhD, and I just was struck by his work. I read the book Man's Search for Meaning. I don't know.
I haven't read it, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
Oh, it's a phenomenal book. Like, it's, you know, worldwide. It's millions of copies sold all over the world, and it's just a very, and it's I would say about it, it's not a cumbersome book. Like, it's quite small, and I think you could get through it pretty fast. But it's in that he talks about, so like Viktor Frankl was, you know, an incredibly intelligent man. He had multiple doctorates. He worked as a neurologist and a psychiatrist, practicing in Vienna, and he was captured during World War II. So he was an Austrian Jew, captured and put into the concentration camps during World War II. And this book very much focuses on where he talks about his theory of meaning in life, and he pretty much tests that theory. So he actually observes and talks about like the prisoners and different things that were happening, and the crux of it really is that, you know, if those that survived, let's say, that type of an experience, and he says, like, you're stripped of everything, you had nothing left, you know, families torn apart, and many of your family members probably died, and then you had, you know, just even in terms of physical belongings, everything taken from you. So he said, you're in a position where, like, you have nothing else. So how did people survive that? And he said they found meaning, and they found meaning in little things. Like, so he said even the sunset, like the birds that you could hear outside, he said, are holding on to a memory of a family member, and just holding that close and using that to reflect every day. Though that's how, and you know, he goes into much greater detail. I'm very much synopsizing it, but he goes into a lot of detail in that book, and he's plenty of other books that he's published. So I was fascinated by that theory. I felt like, wow, okay, in terms of spirituality, then meaning in life, like, you know, would be absolutely a component of that. And it led me down the route of taking on some study in the Viktor Frankl Institute in Dublin. I did a year of study where I got an associate qualification in that, and then I actually did the first year of the diploma, but I just wasn't able to undertake the second year because I took opportunities to travel and went abroad and went. So, but that again is, I suppose if I had done my second year, I could actually practice, let's say, as a logotherapist, and I could be, undertaking practice and seeing patients and all of that. But I didn't go that far. Yeah. But even so, I think what I learned from that I bring into everything I do in life, and it's
fascinating part of your journey. I'm sure that part was. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Brilliant. So. Yeah.
So then, when you went into industry for the first time in Belgium, did you go directly from Belgium to the US? Then was that your next step?
Yeah. Yeah. So we were. I speak say we, my husband to be, and I moved to Belgium, and we were meant to be there for 3 years, but we ended up in our second year. An opportunity came for Jamie, so as I mentioned, he was with the US Navy, to come back to the US and take a position in California. So we opted for that. We just, at this point we had a 9-month-old, and it was the middle of the pandemic. So some people would have said we were nuts, but anyway. So we took the opportunity, we moved to California, and again, that was a whole other experience for me. So I was just moving to the States, and then, I had, obviously, Lily, my daughter, she was 9 months, and she was, I had decided at that point I was kind of ready to come back, I suppose, into work, and because I had been on maternity leave and all of that. So I started looking for opportunities, and again started looking in the industry, and that's what brought me to a company called Terumo Blood and Cell Technologies. So I was working with them for a year remotely. Again, I should say it's brilliant. I mean, I know that the pandemic obviously has been so challenging, but I think one of the benefits that have come out of that is everyone seems to be more tech savvy, or at least open to having those remote positions, and that has just been brilliant for me from a personal perspective as well. So so I took that position. I worked as a clinical affairs manager, and I was in charge of post-market clinical research, or post-market clinical follow-up is the official title of it, but it was it's very much immersed in supporting registration within the EU. So for the devices that we had, which we had 20 plus, ensuring that we had clinical evidence that was going to be used then in our submissions for EU registration. And I don't know if there's anyone immersed in the med tech industry, they'll understand the MDR, which has been a new regulation that's come in the last few years in the EU for medical devices, and there's a lot of requirements with that. I guess that the companies are kind of struggling really to try and get ahead of and meet, because it's quite complex, quite a lot of unknowns, I think, with that new regulation. So so that was my role there. It was great as well, and again working with a fabulous team, and got the opportunity to travel to Denver, which is the headquarters of Terumo, and meet the team there once that was last summer, I think, when things were a little bit better, travel wise. So did that again, and
then you made yet another move across the country, all the way to the other side.
I know, we did. Yeah, so the position in California for Jamie was 1 year.
Right.
So he took that for a year, and then he had done 12 years of service. So the opportunity then to leave or to continue, he wasn't sure. We had another junction, another big decision. And we decided kind of as a family that it would be best to, that he would move into the reserves and kind of see out the rest of his career there. And then from that perspective, then we looked at other opportunities, I guess, outside the Navy, and Tampa, Florida was one that we said, that's a nice place to live. The weather is certainly nice. And for him, he had some great opportunities. The fabulous thing about me is that, again, I was working remotely and I was more flexible, I guess, in my career. So we arrived here in September 2021, and we will be here for the foreseeable. But the long-term plan always is to get back to Cork, get back to Ireland. That's our long-term plan. But I that's probably 8 or 10 years down the line, I would say.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
Well, it's a fascinating career journey, Liz, and thank you for sharing it. And one kind of thread that has just come clearly throughout the whole conversation is kind of your willingness to be open to opportunities and to try different things, and that's kind of stood you in good stead. and a lot of people on the podcast in the past have a kind of a similar attitude, you know, just being open. You can only plan so far, but there'll always be things that come at you that you don't expect, and it's a big decision, as you've said, to either decide to do it or not to do it. And yeah, it's just been, it's really, really interesting, everything that you've done. And best of luck in this role, but also over the next few years as you get to wherever you want to get to. One final question that I have that I asked everybody is, if you could go back to meet yourself just before, let's say, you started your general nursing degree in UCC, and you could sit down and have a coffee with yourself, is there any advice you'd give, anything you'd say absolutely that you should think about, knowing what you know now?
I'd probably tell myself there'll be a pandemic in 2020. I think I would probably say, or just tell myself to think a little bit more carefully about, and to try and put a path in place. So, like, think very carefully about where you want to end up. And I'd probably, you know, you get asked this question all the time, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And
I don't like that question.
I think often, you know, and I don't either. And I think I kind of go, sure, I don't know where I'll be in 5 years, you know. But I think if you do put a little bit of thought into that, and, you know, I'm all about as well, you know, the way they say, you know, the psychology of kind of manifesting where you want to be, and that if you think about, you know, and that you can actually get there and it'll come to be. And I would say, absolutely, I believe in that. So I would say, you know, there is value in sitting down and just genuinely thinking about where you want to be in 5 years. And no matter how ambitious or how crazy it might seem, mapping that out for yourself and then working hard to get there. And I think, you know, I would have probably done well with a bit of that early on in my career, just to keep myself focused. But I am very, as I said, I've just been lucky as well in ways, and very grateful that it's, you know, I've had some fabulous opportunities and ended up where I am today. So
that's great advice, Liz. Well said, well said. And thanks very much for coming on. It's been it's lovely to meet you, and I do wish you every success into the future. You too. Thanks a million. Thank you, Brendan. Cheers. Bye everybody.
Bye.